History of the War in Ukraine, a chronology of events and case for diplomacy. In a special article for the Kennedy Beacon, economist Jeffrey D. Sachs presented a factual timeline on the war between Russia and Ukraine, emphasizing the participation of the U.S. government as a protagonist in promoting the war. Sachs points out that the mainstream American media is not to be trusted, as all they do is narrative reporting to promote a political outcome that matters to the government.
The American people urgently need to know the true history of the war in Ukraine and its current prospects. Unfortunately, the mainstream media have become mere mouthpieces of the government, repeating U.S. President Joe Biden's lies and hiding history from the public. Biden is the one who is trapping Ukraine in an open-ended war by continuing to push NATO enlargement to Ukraine. He is afraid to tell the truth to the American and Ukrainian people, rejecting diplomacy and opting instead for perpetual war.
Jeffrey D. Sachs is professor at Columbia University, director of the Center for Sustainable Development, and president of the UN Sustainable Solutions Network. Sachs has been an advisor to 3 UN Secretaries-General and currently serves as an advocate for the Sustainable Development Goals Initiative. He believes that Ukraine cannot win, and that even so, the Ukrainian and American governments insist on sustaining a farce that costs people's lives in the name of NATO expansion.
Expanding NATO to Ukraine, which Biden has long promoted, is a U.S. gambit that has failed. The neocons, including Biden, thought from the late 1990s onward that the U.S. could expand NATO to Ukraine and Georgia, despite Russia's vociferous and long-standing opposition. They didn't believe that Putin would actually go to war over NATO expansion. For Russia, NATO enlargement to Ukraine and Georgia is viewed as an existential threat to Russia's national security, notably given Russia's 2,000 km border with Ukraine and Georgia's strategic position on the eastern edge of the Black Sea. U.S. diplomats have explained this basic reality to U.S. politicians and generals for decades. But the politicians and generals have arrogantly and crudely persisted in pushing NATO enlargement nonetheless.
Sachs concluded that Biden and his team appear to have bought into their own propaganda that Western sanctions would strangle the Russian economy, while miracle weapons would defeat Russia. Now, even realizing the failure, they lied to the Ukrainians with an empty promise of victory while telling the Americans not to pay attention to Russia's 6,000 nuclear weapons. Sachs argued that it is possible that Ukrainian leaders believe in the U.S., or fear the U.S., or fear their own extremists, or simply are extremists. Or possibly some of the Ukrainian leaders are making their fortunes by siphoning off tens of billions of dollars in Western aid and weapons.
Biden knows full well that NATO enlargement to Ukraine would trigger World War III. That's why behind the scenes, Biden put NATO enlargement into low gear at the Vilnius NATO summit. Yet rather than admit the truth that Ukraine will not be part of NATO, Biden prevaricates, promising Ukraine's eventual membership. In reality, he is committing Ukraine to ongoing bloodletting for no reason other than U.S. domestic politics, specifically Biden's fear of looking weak to his political foes. A half-century ago, Presidents Johnson and Nixon sustained the Vietnam War for essentially the same pathetic reason, and with the same lying, as the late Daniel Ellsberg brilliantly explained. Throughout his entire career, Biden has served the military-industrial complex. He has relentlessly promoted NATO enlargement and supported America's deeply destabilizing wars of choice in Afghanistan, Serbia, Iraq, Syria, Libya, and now Ukraine. He defers to generals who want more war and more surges, and who predict imminent victory just ahead to keep the gullible public on side.
According to Sachs, Russia has repeatedly tried negotiations with different American and European leaders to try to stop NATO expansion to its borders, try to find adequate security agreements, try to resolve interethnic issues in Ukraine, try to maintain limits on anti-ballistic missiles, and finally try to end the war in Ukraine. In every case, the U.S. government has spurned, ignored, or blocked these attempts. Sachs asserted that the path chosen by the U.S. government was that of war, and still spreads a message that war will save the Ukrainian people.
The only way to save Ukraine is a negotiated peace. In a negotiated settlement, the U.S. would agree that NATO will not enlarge to Ukraine while Russia would agree to withdraw its troops. Remaining issues: Crimea, the Donbas, US and European sanctions, the future of European security arrangements would be handled politically, not by endless war.
To help the audience move beyond the simplistic Biden and mainstream media narrative, Sachs presented a timeline of some key events leading up to the ongoing war in Ukraine. To access the full text, visit the link in the description of this video after your like. Thanks for getting this far, and I'll see you in the next video.